The DEC also tried an experiment last year, raising young Atlantic salmon in pens up here in Lake Champlain, and then releasing them. The thought is, if they're released there, that may be imprinted on them. They might come back to that spot right near the mouth of the Saranac River to spawn in later years. Is that continuing again this year? And is the hope that eventually down the road you're going to have a lot of salmon returning to that spot?
Well, that's always our goal with stocking salmon in particular. It's worked on Lake Ontario, where you see similar species actually having now natural reproduction in the lake. So if we can replicate that here in Lake Champlain, we certainly would see that as a serious home run for this region, both again for the environment and also for the economy. So we'd like to continue that this year.
And it's too early to know if it's working. It'll take a few years for them to mature and then come back.
That's right. It'll take several years, and of course several years of monitoring. They need to mature, and we'll then need to have a system to capture and see whether or not it's the same species that we'd ultimately stocked.
Just a little bit upriver is the Imperial Dam. The DEC announced last year that it was going to fix up the dam, add a $6 million fish ladder to help Atlantic salmon get upriver to spawn. A number of people would rather see the dam come out. They think it would be more beneficial just to remove it, but that's much more costly, would require permits, would require removal of sediment. The DEC for now believes that the fish ladder and the fixing up the dam is the best step.
It is. We certainly have listened to all sides on this. Our primary goal is to make sure we get the fish upriver and sort of restore that passageway. And I understand those that would like to see the dam removed. I get it. It's an extraordinary undertaking to remove a dam, and we need to make sure also that we're taking into account the flood mitigation role that the dam provides. And from what I've seen, it does provide some protection downstream. So we take all that into account, not just the cost of the dam, but whether or not from a habitat perspective we can get the fish upriver, and from a flood protection perspective we can continue to provide downstream flood control. So we are taking all of it into account and aware of the passions out there on this.
We've obviously seen an increase in ticks with climate change and warmer temperatures, and we're keeping an eye on invasive species as well, the Hemlock woolly Adelgid and the emerald ash borer. Are we, for right now, containing them and keeping them from getting a foothold in the Adirondack bark?
Well, you're right to note the connection between invasive species and climate change. People often don't think about invasive species when they think about climate change, but it is actually one of the most effective indicators that something is changing with our climate, right? We're seeing these previously unknown species like the Hemlock woolly Adelgid and the EAB, the emerald ash borer, really decimating our forests from a south to north perspective. And it's south to north in part for two reasons. One, typically these things are coming into the country at our ports and then moving away from the ports, and that in New York happens to be south to north. But it's also the temperature. And we see severe weather also with big storms that blow through, pushing them, accelerating the spread across the state. It's a real problem. It's an economic issue in New York. And look at the hemlocks now, being so heavily impacted. The ash trees across the state. You can't drive a mile in New York without seeing a fairly decimated landscape of ash trees, and it's really disconcerting. Can we prevent it from ever accessing parts of the Adirondacks? It's going to be a real challenge. I mean, we're spending extraordinary staff resources to detect it and ultimately respond as we see problems. But if the Earth keeps warming the way it is, it's going to be that much easier for these species who don't know New York to get into these backcountry areas and wreak some real havoc. Climate change is also moving fish out of New York waters. We don't talk a lot about that. Certainly up here, we're far away from the Atlantic coast, but we're seeing some species of fish just move out of New York waters and move into for example, off of the Maine coast, like summer flounder, for example, are migrating north because the waters are just too warm where we are. So there are some real challenges that we're seeing in our lifetimes with habitat, with flora, fauna as a result of climate change.
And wildlife, moose, bicknell thrush, the concern that if it warms up too much, the bicknell thrush that already nest in some of the highest elevations, it may push them
north
out,
until
north out of New York altogether.
Into Canada, yes.